Hi, Amanda. How are you today?
Well, that's a loaded question, but thank you for asking. It's been a big journey, so I'm not going to answer that with yes, I'm okay, because I'm not.
Okay, no.
Thank you for
Well,
asking.
I'm sure we're going to find out a lot of the reasons behind that now. So let's kick off. Why don't we start with a few quick questions about mandatory reports, as this is a document that we will be discussing a lot during our interview today. Would you give us a short explanation of why a teacher might lodge a mandatory report?
Okay, in order to answer that correctly, I need to educate people because not just regular citizens, but even professionals on this journey, they don't know the mandatory reporting legislation, and it is this simple. I'm going to make it very easy to understand. Anyone who works with children is a mandatory reporter. Now, I'm a former police officer. I was a mandatory reporter. As a teaching assistant, while I trained to be a teacher, I was a mandatory reporter. Now that I'm a teacher, I am a mandatory reporter. Now, this reaches to anyone in a school. That would be the bus driver, that would be the gardener, in a boarding school, anyone to do with the boarding, everybody. Everybody is a mandatory reporter, which means any information that comes to you that is with any kind of connection to child abuse must be reported.
Well, that answers my second question, which is, are all Australian teachers obliged to lodge mandatory reports? So obviously they are.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, on this journey, I had been well trained, but I learned very quickly that if you are in receipt of child abuse information and you fail to report it, that's actually a criminal offence. You can go to jail.
I didn't know that. And wow, there'd be a lot of people going to jail.
Well, I was well trained, but
Mm.
even I learned early on in this journey, I learned that, yes, if you are in receipt of any information and you fail to bring it forward, and in a school setting, you report directly to the principal. That's it. You don't go to anybody else. You discreetly tell the principal, and the principal manages it. And we'll talk about that later because that is part of the problem.
When was this system of mandatory reporting introduced into Australia? How long's it been around?
Actually, that's a good question. I can't answer that, but I'm going to guess at the 80s. I'm not sure. I can research that and find out if there's an exact date. But I do know that I've been involved in education since 2000, directly since about 2003, and it was always in place.
Right.
My training was always very clear.
So this isn't new. It has been around for
It should have been around for yes, it should have been around for a long time. But I can research and find out historically uh, how long it's been in place. And while I'm thinking of it, I just want to cite some examples, and we can extrapolate on these later. At one stage of this journey, I was looking for legal representation, and I called a very large firm, and there was a young, I'm going to say young legal student who was vetting the calls. And I realised quite quickly that she didn't understand mandatory reporting. So I stopped the conversation and I asked her, I said, do you know the mandatory reporting legislation? And she said no. And she was vetting the calls.
wow.
And I've also engaged in address with Fairfax Media, and I sent evidence to Fairfax Media to support the fact that an article that was written about me was false and misleading. And I sent an email from New South Wales Police. I deleted all the victim details. And I said, here you go. I reported this in 2011 and it was not investigated until 2018.
Wow.
Yes, so I have evidence to show that information is not being investigated. And the editor said, oh, well, no, well, and he made a comment and I realised he didn't know the legislation. And I'm thinking, how can you adjudicate on an item of evidence when you don't even know the legislation? So that's why that's why I explained it simply.
Yeah.
And other people, it's not just education, it's anyone in the legal profession, anyone in medical. So that would be counsellors, psychologists, anyone in any of those major professions, anyone who has interaction with children is a mandatory reporter. So it's not just education.
Yes. How are you aware of how many, or the scope, I suppose, of the amount of mandatory reports that have been submitted since inception of the system? Do you have any grasp of how many might have been actually raised?
Well, I can't answer that question with statistics, but I can tell you I'm not the only teacher, the only professional to have their life destroyed immediately after making a mandatory report.
So you know one other, or is it are there a lot of ex-teachers out there?
Many, and I'm not talking teachers. I'm talking education. I'm talking legal. I'm talking in other agencies, other professions, not just teaching. If you go to the excuse me, if you go to the Child Abuse Whistleblowers community page on Facebook, and you go to the beginning and go to the first post, and I created it in a series of posts, you'll see one post early on that lists a variety of people, not just teachers.
Wow.
So I cited examples of other people who either had their lives destroyed or who were just up against a brick wall trying to get information investigated.
So are any of these mandatory reports actually investigated, or is there a certain criteria they only investigate, like ones that have resulted in a death or some major, incident?
My understanding is all information is meant to be reported, but that's clearly not happening, and I have proof, and it's taken a long time and a huge toll on my life, but I'm pleased to say that I am in receipt of information that shows that mandatory reports are not being investigated. Now, once you make a mandatory report, it's not in your hands. You give it to, in my instance, it was the principal. So it's in the hands of the principal. And then at some stage you are required to be given a receipt of investigation. It's just a brief letter that says an investigation has been conducted. So you have receipt of that. Now, I don't have those. I have extensive files. I've kept everything since 2011. And I have files that are missing that receipt.
Wow. Okay, that's very suspicious. So now that we've kind of covered what mandatory reporting is about and the scope of it, would you give us an overview of why you personally lodged 2 mandatory reports in relation to child abuse in 2011, and how this led to your current role as a child abuse whistleblower?
Well, I'm required. It's mandated by law, so it's legislation, plus it's a part of my professional duty of care. So I had no option but to report information. Now, I had made a couple of mandatory reports prior to that, and as far as I know, they were addressed properly. But at the end of 2010, during the school holidays, I came to be in receipt of information. So at the beginning of the school year, during the holidays, I reported it immediately. But by the time we returned to school, 2011, the impact, it was obvious that my life was going to be destroyed. It was very evident.
Wow.
There were 2 mandatory reports. The first one was small, no less important, but it was an item of information. And the second one came a few months later, and that spanned 35 years, and that was multiple people. Wow. And by that stage, let's fast forward, my life had been destroyed. The Catholic Schools Office had sent me to a variety of psychiatrists, even a forensic psychiatrist, and none of them could assess me as mentally ill, because I didn't realise it at the time, but in reflection, it was obvious that the Catholic Schools Office in Wagga Wagga were trying to have me assessed as mentally ill, because that would make the mandatory reports go away as a figment of my imagination. And that didn't happen. So by the time I was in receipt, it's very complicated, but by the time I was in receipt of further information, I just wrote down everything that was connected. I had no support. So by then I didn't have any support from an employer and the agencies. I did everything on this journey correctly. I went through agencies, followed their lead, multiple agencies, no support.
Mm.
And I think what I found most distressing was the fact that this is what constitutes an investigation.
Yes.
Sharon, this information has come to us. Did you do this? And you say no, and that's it.
So
That's it.
it's, I suppose there could be a lot of factors to that, as lack of resources as well, maybe in certain areas, or
No. Since 2011, well, you can do the maths on. It's now 2019. I've learned a lot, and in some cases, that is all that constitutes an investigation.
wow, okay, that's not good at all. So why did you set up the Child Abuse Whistleblowers community page on Facebook, which is great, by the way?
Thank you. Well, I had been through so many agencies. I made my way to federal court, which was an option after I'd been through another agency. I won't list them all, there are far too many. I finally made my way to the Human Court, the Federal Circuit Court of Human Rights. And I was so tired that I was too tired to be nervous, and I represented myself because I couldn't find representation. And then someone online had conducted some research and got back to me and said, Amanda, you're better off representing yourself because professional legal practitioners take an oath, which means they are bound by that oath, whereas if you represent yourself, you've got less boundary.
Yeah.
Thought about that and I thought, great. And that took a huge load off my shoulders. So I prepared my case. I went to the initial hearing and the judge said, I'm not completely satisfied. I'm going to grant you an interlocutory hearing. Now, I had no idea what that was.
No, neither do I.
Well, it was a small win. It was a win. So I researched interlocutory hearing and it meant the judge wanted to see more evidence, which was really good. Now, this is I'm going to be very, very concise because there are overlaps. I cannot tell this story in chronological order. Sometimes I was dealing with several agencies at once, several administrative processes. Basically, I went to the interlocutory hearing. I had submitted all my evidence. I think it was 300 odd pages of evidence. And the Catholic Schools Office of Wagga Wagga, they had that evidence for 6 months. Okay, had 6 months to assess it. I walked into the courtroom. The barrister put down a white folder and said, that's for you. And for 2 days, I argued a single point of law that was not even a month old.
Wow, okay.
I had them scared. I didn't win that particular instance because just bore I went to court, I received 2 large bundles of paperwork from the education legal representative, the union representative, with a letter saying I can no longer represent you. There was a bundle. Yes, it gets interesting. So I received this. I'd already put my evidence in. I'm exhausted. I've got no support. I'm running around trying to earn a living, keep a roof over my head. I've got no family. So that's always been a problem. But I got these 2 large bundles, 200 and 300 pages of documents. And I sat down and I went through them and I wept. Lies had been written about me, statements, signed statements. Some of them could be proved purely by looking at administrative records. You know, lies about when I was at the school, what I was doing, all sorts of false, absolutely false information. And that was the first I had seen them. So I suddenly realised that all the other administrative professionals I'd been dealing with had read these documents and were relying on them. I had not had a single opportunity to defend myself. Here is one of the major lessons on this journey. This is how they circumvent the system. So I wept. Then I sat down and I systematically went through each and every page and documented everything that was false. There are hundreds of examples. So basically, I went to court exhausted, unrepresented. The judge did say, well, do you know how to submit additional evidence? I said, I do, Your Honour, but I did not have the energy to process 500 pieces of paper. I just didn't have it in me.
Mm.
I was too busy trying to earn a living, keeping a roof over my head, and I just couldn't.
They must rely on this. They wear you down slowly until the point, and then, fancy reading 500 pages of negativity about yourself. That would have been soul destroying.
And the fact that everybody else had relied on them. And so then it made sense why people were looking at me and shaking their head. There was a gentleman from the Human Rights Commission. He laughed at me. I thought, how dare you laugh at me? And I realised now that he'd read the documents and was making an opinion about me. He formed an opinion about me, and that's why I didn't get anywhere. But I persisted because, well, they destroyed my life. I had nothing better to do than try and find answers. That's what kept me going. And the fact that it's about children, and I felt I have a conscience, and walking away.
When it's kid related, Amanda, everybody gets that. Yeah, well, most normal people get that feeling of you just want to defend them. Maybe not adults, but kids. Yes, they're innocent.
Let's come back to you asked about the Child Abuse Whistleblowers page. So basically, I had been to federal court. I didn't win that particular battle, and because they won, they can seek costs. And so a couple of weeks, I've got nothing. And a couple of weeks later, I got a letter saying, oh, we won't be seeking costs. So I thought, good, I won that one. But do know that during the interlocutory hearing, on the transcript, you will see a comment that states from me, well, the Catholic Church being the wealthiest organisation on the planet, the judge didn't pull me up on that, nor did the barrister. He or his offside, they didn't question that. So why would you want to take costs from someone who's got nothing? You've destroyed me. You destroyed me. So basically I won that I didn't win the case, but it enabled me to keep going. And I thought, why didn't they seek costs? That's because they didn't want me back in a courtroom, because for 2 days I argued unrepresented. And I had a witness who was outside, a friend. He's a legal practitioner, and advised me to not take my witness into the courtroom. And my witness advised me that, oh yes, the barrister came out during the break and he did not look happy. They thought they could walk in there and be out in 5 minutes. I argued point law for 2 days. If you don't think that you can rise to the occasion when you have to, I had no idea I could do that, but I rose to the occasion, the opportunity presented, and I fought.
There are moments in life where you realise that it's not about you at all. It's about fairness and rectifying something that's an evil. And let's face it, anything to do with abusing children is evil, in my opinion.
It is, and it's changed me. This journey has changed me. Not that I was any different in my attitude towards child abuse and crimes against children, but it's changed me. I know far too much now. But let's come back to the Child Abuse Whistleblowers page. Now, on Facebook, I constructed it in a very particular manner. I researched. It was I had no other option. I'd been through all the agencies. I'd been to federal court. What more could I do? I thought, okay, people were referring to me as a child abuse whistleblower. So I thought, let's take this to the next level. So I conducted legal research, and there is no child abuse whistleblower legislation. So I thought, good, let's work with that. Let's work with what's not there. It's not so much what is there, what's not there. And so working on that, and then conducting other legal research, I decided to create the Facebook page, and I did it very specifically. I thought, I'll create a series of posts. That's why I like people to go to the beginning. Don't just go on and read the latest post. Go to the beginning. There were a series, I think there were maybe 20 posts. So I made them short, concise. And in the first post, I declared my legal rights to do what I'm doing. And formally, I guess you could say, I formally announced myself to the public as a child abuse whistleblower. And it worked, because I named names. There was one particular post where I put sensitive information in there. And I want to add, I would never name a victim or a witness, not with a gun to my head. I would not do that ever. So basically, I did put sensitive information there about POIs, that's persons of interest. And the first thing that happened was people contacted me via private messaging and stated, Amanda, that's correct, that's correct, that's correct. Did you know about this one? They actually provided me more information.
Well, there you go.
So if I had any doubts, they just fell away. The second thing to happen was the Catholic school, obviously, and the local government school went berserk. And Facebook only took down two posts. So I thought, great, that's a win. I'm lying on the couch the next day, absolutely exhausted, just spent. And some friends came by and said, Amanda, there was a big assembly held at the Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got up off the couch and thought, yay, I couldn't ask for better advertising. Couldn't ask for better advertising. And later on, I spoke to some parents who said, yeah, my child was up the back and they didn't know what was going on, but they do now. So in actual fact, it was great advertisement. They didn't win that one. Then a little while after that, there was what would you call it? It was a public meeting was convened. It was advertised in the local paper. I attended and sat up the back and took notes. And it was the only time I was actually accosted. A local stood in front of me in the steps, didn't want to let me enter.
Really?
And, yes. And basically it was the Catholic Church sending a particular person to talk, and all they did was cite statistics. That's all they did. Well, I made notes. I took handwritten notes. I have those on file.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll get back to that. But that's basically how and why I set up the Child Abuse Whistleblowers community page.
That's good. So obviously, since you created it, you've received a number of reports of child abuse and supporting documentation. You just said that. Have any of these reports stood out from the rest? And if so, would you give us an overview and maybe an update on what's going on with it?
Okay, there's an excellent one at the moment that I'm assisting. Some people contacted me. Oh, it's been 2 or 3 years now. I'll be very careful to not identify. Basically, a child has a permanent injury. Child has been examined by a paediatric neurosurgeon. So I have the reports. I would not get this involved without all the documentation. So I have documentation for all of this. So child has a permanent physical injury, has been examined by a paediatric neurosurgeon, has been interviewed by JERT detectives. Those are specialist detectives in the police service who interview children for in any regards to child abuse. Child discloses exactly how it happened. Child has disclosed to at least 20 people, at least 10 medical professionals and numerous police. There are over 100 fax docs notifications, and I am still battling to get a brief of evidence compiled in that matter to be placed before a court for a proper judicial adjudication.
See, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's assault. I mean, bloody hell, somebody goes and knocks somebody out outside a nightclub and that's in the courts the next day. How is it that this is not the same? I mean, this is so much worse, in my opinion.
It is, and now you know why I've continued. And I'm happy to help these people. When people get, and this isn't the only instance where people have sent me information and evidence so that I can support them. And I am always very, very clear. I don't give legal advice. I just provide practical advice. And as a teacher, I can help them formulate correspondence, help them understand legal procedures. But we'll talk about that later. We can expand on that because a lot of people don't know their rights. But yes, that is an ongoing example. Now, I'm very close, I believe, to having that addressed.
Right.
In recent weeks, I've sent correspondence to New South Wales Police Commissioner Fuller. He's the one who ensured that the item of mandatory report information reported in 2011 was finally addressed in 2018. So I've got that proof on paper. But I've also acknowledged, appraised him. I've contacted the Department of Public Prosecutions. They fobbed me off last year, but I regained some energy with my health and I pushed again. And I sent the same correspondence to both New South Wales Police Commissioner Fuller and the Assistant Director at the Department of Public Prosecutions. And I basically stated, what do we need? because most people don't understand assault occasioning actual bodily harm. You don't even technically have to touch somebody. So how is it a child with a permanent injury does not have a brief of evidence compiled and is not, and I spoke to numerous police, but I had to pull my boundaries in because I didn't want to be seen to be interfering with a police investigation, because a certain amount of work was done. But I could not understand, and having been a police officer, I have a sound understanding of procedure. I don't know, I can go off and research. But I couldn't understand, with all this evidence, such strong evidence, why that matter wasn't before the court.
Yeah.
So I'm just waiting on a response from Commissioner Fuller and the Department of Public Prosecutions for that particular example of child abuse.
Wow.
It is. It's. What can you say?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm a little gobsmacked here, but please keep us informed so we can post some updates.
Yes.
So you previously stated on the website and that you wondered previously why a teacher would have their life destroyed due to lodging a mandatory report on suspected child abuse, because a teacher who obeys the law, who adheres to their professional training. I mean, that whole concept of why there will be any negative consequences to the teacher just blows my mind. I mean, it's child abuse. It's a no-brainer. In your own situation, what was taken from you specifically post your submission of the 2 mandatory reports? Like, obviously your job, we've already discussed that. What other things? Like, obviously, respect. People lost respect for you in certain areas because of what was being said. So there was.
Let's go back to when I stated that it was during school holidays, and when I went back to work, people I had worked with for 7 years, it was like someone brought a roller door down. They all stopped talking to me, and I thought, you've all been instructed to stop interacting with me.
Wow.
It was the first thing that happened when I went back. I just thought, you all know. Then a little while later, I had a visitor to my home who said, what's going on? They weren't working there anymore, and they said to me, what's going on? They had been at a social setting, and the elements of the mandatory reports were being discussed in social settings, and that's completely illegal.
Wow.
Going back just briefly, every aspect of my life was destroyed. My health, my professional, personal reputation. And when I blew the whistle and went public on the Facebook Child Abuse Whistleblowers page, there was an article written in the local paper that brandished me as a liar and a fool. And it was completely false and misleading. I'm currently waiting on Fairfax Media to address that. I've been fighting to have that addressed.
Yeah, I would too.
And that demolished my life on another level. I applied for teaching positions and got no response. I sent emails and said, well, I'm not going to question your issue of not giving me the position. Can you tell me how to better present myself next time? And I got no response. I could give you numerous examples of how poorly I was treated.
Yeah. Did you try outside of the Catholic teaching system as well?
So I'm talking. I got a little bit of work as a casual there for quite a while, but I had to travel to get to the schools, and mostly it was primary school, for which I'm not trained, but I like the little kids. The young kids are fabulous, but I got some work, and then that trickled off, and then my health started to collapse, and it was just this is a huge battle. It really is huge.
Yeah, and they seem to know how to cripple you. That's for sure. So
yes,
do you think other child abuse mandatory reporters and reports have been mismanaged like your own? And if so, do you think this is down to incompetence within the Catholic Church and its leaders or other organisations, or another government body? Or do you believe it is an intentional process and how riddled with corruption is our system here? I mean, and people listening to this broadcast, should they be going into schools before they leave their children there and actually checking these places out? How riddled is it?
Gee whiz, that's a huge question, and I have to answer it very carefully. What I want to do firstly is to defend those people who are not part of any kind of corruption. I know from personal experience that organisations have good and bad in them. And I can't imagine how difficult it would be to go to work every day being one of the decent people who tries to do their job well and to do it fairly and to be fair and to be surrounded by others who are not, or to have people in positions of seniority who don't let them do what they need to do. Think back to Inspector Fox, Chief Inspector Fox on Late Line on ABC. His comments instigated the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. Now, as a former operational police officer, I knew that that condemned his career, because you have to have the Commissioner's permission to speak openly like that on a public forum, and especially a national television show.
So we're talking systemic, aren't we?
Well, what I want to do is I want to defend those people who aren't part of it. I think there is, okay, from my perspective, from what I've learned on this journey, there seems to be an inherent lack of common sense. People follow procedure to the point that it's inane. They're tick like, no offense to the monkeys, but a trained monkey could tick boxes. And I know as a university trained former police officer, you are told you can adjudicate on any given situation as long as you follow procedure. So if it's something minor, you can give a person a warning, write it up, make it formal, show your senior officers you're doing the job, but you don't have to arrest every single person for every single thing. Adjudicate, work it out. Have they actually committed an offence? Well, then yes, you have to proceed. So there doesn't seem to be any common sense, and there doesn't seem to be any focus on the fact we're dealing with abused children. That doesn't seem to factor in. It's not like it's even more important to get your job right. That's triggered a memory. I had to speak to a legal person recently. Someone was attacking me, and I sent evidence and explained the situation. And in that legal setting, during our conversation, the lady this was a manager, this was a high-ranking employee, stated to me, "I'm so glad someone like you is doing this." Because during our conversation, we had to work out how to handle the situation. There was no protocol. So between us and between our academic knowledge, our skill set, we had to work out, how do we handle this? And luckily that person was on side and protected my identity. We agreed on a way to get the information to the proper authorities without endangering my safety. So how about that?
Yeah. There definitely are people there to help you in the system. I follow a lot of the US politics, and what's happening over there at the moment. The way they've downplayed. We'll talk a bit more about Pizzagate down the track on our interview, but it seems to be all of these evil people seem to have got to the top in most of these organisations, and they only employ their own people like themselves in managerial roles. So basically, if you do come in as a newbie and you don't have their evil tendencies, you never really make it through into a managerial position. So you're never in a position to actually get things fixed. So tell me, Amanda, if one of our listeners today is a survivor of child abuse and they're ready to come forward, what would you recommend their first step to be?
Should you want to report it to police, it will be historic. If you're not reporting it at the time, it's considered an historic report. Just know that there are special procedures in place. The detectives will speak to you. You don't speak to general duties. And just be prepared for the fact that you will have to recount the details. And I can't imagine how traumatic that would be.
How many times would they have to as well?
And also the fact that if you're, and here's an important aspect, if the POI is deceased, then there'll be no legal action. You can't take action against somebody who's deceased.
Okay,
So
that's
the
a shame.
POI have to be living. You triggered my memory. Now, before you asked that specific question, you were talking about, I wanted to give some relevant information to the public, but it's slipped my mind. I'm taking your lead. But just know there are a variety of options. You can go and speak to a counsellor, prepare yourself, a regular counsellor or a psychologist, a psychiatrist. You can ask your doctor for a referral. I think there's compensation in some states. I don't know much about that, but if you're seeking compensation, but whatever you do, whatever course you take, just be prepared. You're going to have to relay the details. You're going to have to relive the abuse. So prepare yourself for that. I think that, from my perspective, that's probably the hardest part, because some people are so traumatized they can't speak. It's just too painful. So they can speak to someone like me, they can speak to a medical professional, they can speak to the police. It's up to them who they decide to contact. Someone like me, I could at least let them know what their options are given their situation, and I could do that discreetly, privately. But if they want to go straight to the police, know that it will be an historic account and you'll go straight to the detectives. There is a procedure in place and you'll have to follow that procedure. It can be very clinical and difficult.
I think that's a no-brainer. It will definitely be difficult, and you'll be amazed at the amount of stress that you'll be placed under as technically the survivor and not the the predator.
Yes, that was what I was going to say. At some stage in my journey, going back to the police and the administrative services, and how I mentioned that I'd like to defend the decent people who go to work every day and try to do the job properly. At some stage in this journey, and I can't recall when it was, but there was a police officer said to me, "Amanda, there are police watching you and they're willing you to win." And later on I thought about that, and I'm thinking there may be administrative procedures that aren't available to them. So another option on this journey would be to open an opportunity for proper legislation to be drafted. Not that we need any more, we've got so much, but if it's not working, then we need to fine-tune it, we need to add to it. Jurisprudence is always growing. She's not static.
Oh, no, there's a group, just from a political perspective, but I was actually watching them expose something the other day, and I was thinking, wow, this is what we should do with child abuse as well. There's a group called, I think, JW Judicial Watch in the States, and I love their stuff on YouTube, and basically they've been taking all of these intersectionality groups out, or political people that work for campaigns, and finding out how dirty the campaign's been, and they've been getting them on hidden cameras and exposés. And I know that a lot of that stuff is seen, honey trapping, that's the word I was trying to remember. A lot of people see that as a honey trap, like they wouldn't have said that under normal circumstances. No, they wouldn't have been honest because they, about what they were actually doing. But in the States, I don't know if their legal system kind of basically what happens is JW goes out, they release all the tapes, they expose the hypocrisy, and then they get like 1 million, 2 million hits on YouTube, and then finally the government basically goes, okay, we have to look at this because everybody knows about it. Why they should be doing this to predators? They should be setting them up, getting them talking at a pub and saying, so have you ever done, and actually get them on camera. You never see that with child abuse stuff. And I'm just thinking, I think we've got to get past the point where it's not to be talked about. And we've got to be able to get out there with a bloody hidden camera, one of those little spy pens, which you can get these days, or a little button, and record these people in there and then expose them everywhere. That's my approach. And it's probably not it's all going to work. It'll probably all be when you hit a courtroom and no one will that'll get kicked out within 2 seconds, you know. But at least everybody knows then, you know, and the more it builds and builds. So that's kind of where I come from. I just hate this silence around all of this, and I find the legal side of things just. I worked in legal for 10 years. It was my first job, and I was in the IT side of the business. And the worst time was the 3 months I spent in family planning, setting up their database systems, and the stuff I saw. And remember, I was only like 21, just graduated, and it scarred me for life. That 3 months, seeing what goes on. Anyway, sorry, I'm hijacking your interview here. So
no, you're not. You're obviously motivated. Now,